from all, to all, with all, for all, through all. We thank the gods of creation. We thank the ancestors. We thank the forces of nature. And we thank the earth. We thank them for their direction, their protection, their guidance, for keeping us, showing us, allowing us to know and enjoy life to its fullest, now and later.
Black people was love with the slow march of time. Time was ours to hold in the soft, love-warm chambers of our hearts. And was we, the Afro mommies and daddies of a sun world, would turn our strands of hair into antennas to tune in the juju madness and syncopated love rhythms of Africa. And we love with time, and we took the time to love, and with the right time we love, and we love time after time. Will we ever love again? Will we ever love again? Will we really ever love again? Or will we just sit and rot away with the brighter tomorrows in the skag field, rat-cluttered halls of our minds?
Black people, what y'all gonna do? Black people, what y'all gonna do?
Will the real black people please stand up?
Let our rejoicing rise high as listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us, facing the rise.
Jumbo Habari, and welcome once again to our story, the program that makes being black positive, relevant, and true to a lost nation. It is our story who talks about commitment to you and your people. It is our story that champions the reestablishment of the black genius that once ruled the world. It is our story that focuses you in on the rewards of black advocacy, black activism, black involvement, and black power. It is our story that encourages survival of the black race and solicits your involvement to that end. Black folks must remember, race first is the call of the day. And we as a people must, I say must, take the pledge if we, the people of the original race, expect to survive. As I take the many lessons I have received over the years and reflect upon them by sharing these lessons with my brothers and sisters, I realize the power that we as a people possess, for the most part, has gone unnoticed. The masses of black folks who have been rendered lost and disenfranchised from the meaning and mission our creators intended for us to embrace is all but depleted. It is because of the mission and meaning of the life of our ancestors that I realize how blessed as black people we really are. What fascinates me are the many gifts I have been granted, which allows me to distribute the information onward to you. As always, that message begins and ends with the importance of blackness. Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. Greetings, friends, comrades, family, the inquisitive onlooker, and our beloved viewers. Welcome, welcome, and welcome to Our Story Network. We thank you for being with us this evening, and we trust you will take something of value away with you after the program. That is the aim and goal of Our Story Network, the network that leads the pack in modern-day communications and ancient and modern-day education. I say ancient and modern education because of the many errors we have found in the translations and interpretations of ancient records. The modern revelations by new black scholars have opened the windows of discovery that has allowed the truth and knowledge originally disseminated by the black masters of education to flourish once again. This is one of the stumbling blocks that has kept black people from rebuilding their greatness and recapturing their birthright. Good evening, brothers and sisters. Welcome to Our Story Network, the program that unapologetically stands up and speaks up for the black people who cannot stand or speak for themselves. I know this sounds like a far-fetched proposition for many who are closed to revolutionary rhymes and reasoning. This program is not for you. It is not for the faint of heart, nor inquisitive onlookers. I specify the occasional onlookers because I find many of these types hanging around to see what information they can collect to condemn the reason and rationale for wanting to be free. Before we get to tonight's topic, I want to share with you my experiences this past week with the screening of the New Orleans Film Festival's documentary of What You Gonna Do When the World's on Fire. This was a mixed bag of Amos and Andy style peek into life as a black person in New Orleans, with the fire of the New Orleans Panther Party thrown in as a sidebar of humor and excitement. I was amazed at the number of black people viewing this documentary with me. The mostly white audience seemingly out for a night of drinks, laughter, and feel-good sessions of how they use black people to make money, and laughed at black people at the same time, mocking the tragedies, living conditions, and lack of opportunities blacks find themselves caught up in yesterday and today. My amazement was obviously not shared by most, if anyone there. To watch black people being used as court gestures is something black folk have been dealing with all of our lives. What kept going through my head was the repeating phrase, when are black people going to write their own narrative and leave white people alone? This film, if you can call it that, was a computation of various footage, helter-skelter, thrown together without rhyme or reason. At least rhyme or reason that was beneficial for black people. The film was focused in on a set of brothers, one about 16, the other about 10, being schooled by their mom while dad was waiting to get out of prison. Some bead work by Mardi Gras Indians doing beads on their costumes for the coming year. An ex-addict who wanted to open a bar did so and lost the bar for lack of management skills. In Crystal Muhammad, the leader of the new Black Panther Party, ranting and raving about what the white people have done and continue to do to black people. The new Black Panther Party was cast in the role of revolutionaries who had a bark worse than their bite. The laughter throughout the documentary reminded me of the movie by Spike Lee entitled Bamboozled, whereby blacks were made to wear blackface and do minstrel acts that were degrading. What added insult to injury in the face of the new Black Panther Party, along with the former bar owner, All are flying to Europe to be available at the screening there. When I found out this was the last year's film entry, I realized white folks were milking this for all they could get. By using several of the performers in the documentary, this would ensure sellout screenings. When I asked about the percentage the performers were getting, one of the new Black Panther members told me that it had not been discussed, and he had asked about the money. His remarks were, "I hope they get something besides a plane ride and a hotel room." Once again, the Black Panther movement is getting the shaft from the liberal white people who always make money off of the very people who put their necks on the line for the cause. Someone asked if I was going to stay for the Q&A. My response was, they don't want to hear what I have to say about this mockery of Amos and Andy's story telling a serious life and death issues in the Black community. Which brings me to tonight's topic. I have invited Reverend Denise Graves, community activist, community pastor, and a Black woman who not only has academic skills but real life experiences to back up the expertise in the world of religion. So without further introduction, welcome Reverend Denise Graves to our story. Thank you for being kind enough to share your skills and experiences with us tonight. Please give our audience a brief background of your education and involvement. Reverend Graves, welcome.
Thank you. Am I looking at you?
Yes.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I think what qualifies me most to be in this present moment is that there are women and men who gave spiritual leadership way before I came on the scene. And those people did those practices in the field. They weren't always in a building. I was reading a book called The Prophesying Daughters, and it talked about these 4 women who, from the late 1800s to the early 1900s, went around just doing evangelizing and preaching in America. So I think I'm just standing on some people's shoulders, actually. Yes, I am a graduate of the St. Paul School of Theology, attended Central Baptist Seminary and the American Institute of Holistic Theology, and yes, a number of other seminaries in the process. But the truth is, I'm a person who was raised in the idea that spirituality mattered. So growing up in the Church of God in Christ and in Catholic environments and indigenous African practices and Native American practices really set the stage for how I was going to live in this world. I think before I even knew that people got degrees and certificates to do what I'm doing, it was something I was supposed to do. So my mother was the lead in how that looked. To be a member of community meant that you waged for what was right and you provided support in communal ways. So faith for me and spirituality for me is my foundation. It has new languages and new formations as I travel through the world. But at the end of the day and the beginning of the morning, that's how I'm centered, for my soul is conscious of its temporary nature that will have eternal impacts when my body leaves. So that's a little bit. I'm not sure if that's what you're looking for, but I will say this. I'm pretty happy that faith informs how I organize.
Very good.
So we can start anywhere you want. I really enjoy studying ancient text and ancient practices, indigenous practices, and how we take that knowledge and apply that to how we live our lives in the 21st century. What's real, what's new, what time is over, what now?
I'll jump right in then. I'm glad you're ready. You know, one of the big problems I have is that the Black ministries around this country, and for that matter around the world, do not educate us about the church, where it came from, and how people have gotten to where they are today. If I go to church and just take the word of any minister, be it a white or black church, I'm going to be faced with the problem that being black means that I'm something less than human. In fact, the Catholic Church deemed us less than human in order to justify the enslavement process. When we look at Christian Church, Islam, even Hinduism, all of them justify slavery. So I want to know, from a theological point of view, why isn't the truth told about who created the Christian church to begin with?
So I cannot answer for other people.
Okay.
But there's a scripture in the Bible that says, study to show thyself approved, a workman that needed not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. So the first thing I would say is that we have a responsibility to be seekers and not just acceptors. In the movie The Birth of the Nation, it depicts Nat Turner when he was believed he was called to preach. He only preached what those folks told him to preach. But when Nat Turner read the Bible for himself, then the message became a different message. So I would say our first responsibility as we do our own spiritual faith work is to be seekers and to be studiers so that we can rightly divine what is true and what isn't. I would secondly say that institutional church has been perpetrated throughout the Western Hemisphere, and other parts of the world have a particular purpose in mind, and often it is designed to support the political leadership of an environment. So when we come up with the idea that so many faith traditions came out of what we call the Catholic Church representing the universal church, it was a system set up to continue the feudal system of King James. And so, of course, all the discussion is around how to keep those less than, with what's called less than, meeting the needs of those who have what more or much, or want more or much. The challenge we find in the 21st century is to figure out, since these institutions do exist, how does a reshaping a system look and what part of it is ours? So I too am clear that I am not interested in being a part of systems that promote white supremacy, that promote patriarchy. I'm not interested in the system, but I am interested in the stories of light and the examples of what makes us whole, healthy, and complete. And I think those stories are certainly out there. The way I do community ministry at this point is my word matters. I am a scholar. I am informed by being the feminine in America and the umbrella of racism that shapes a lot of things. But it does not take away from my understanding of my spiritual connection to what is whole and greater than all those other things. And that's what I learned from the people whose shoulders I stand on. That was a message that was always trickling in loudly and smoothly and softly through my upbringing. I have no heaven or hell to put anyone in, but I refuse to live in a hell not by my design or intent. So part of what it means for me to be spiritually awake and faithfully present and religiously a good scholar means that I continually walk in that direction, opening doors that must be opened, closing doors that must close, and assisting people in the process of their own evolution. So no, institutionalized religion and mainline traditions that do not support the advancement of the human soul and the person as a whole person, they have no place in the theology that I support or that I promote. I know that they exist, but it is not what gives me my directive at this point, other than to say those structures, it's time to dismantle those structures.
You mentioned about the political leadership of the environment, which I'm going to get back to in a minute, because it's hard to get ministers, imams, to discuss the politicalness of religion. When we research the religion, we find that religion came about because of politics. Many of the things that we read in the Bible, well, actually, all of the things that we read in the Bible was not the Word of God. It didn't get there by the Word of God. It got there as a political decision.
By Constantinople,
yes,
the Council of Nicaea.
Yes.
That's true. And consequently, these other scrolls that are surfacing create greater need to analyze what folks have accepted as the only word. I just want to continue to point out that the Bible's canonization occurred while all these other things were happening in the world. So while Daniel was in the lion's den in Babylon, Aesop was writing fables, and the Mayans were living out their spiritual systems as well. So it's a story written that is designed to make it the broadest story, but there are all these other stories occurring. That's important for people to keep in mind. The other point I want to make about this is that when we begin to take a look at the origins of religious structures, and you get to trace it back, what came from this, what came from that, and how it's evolved now. The part that is hard for us to just have hope in and a sense of home in is the predictability of what we can believe in, what we can know, what we can expect in terms of manifestation to make our lives a better life. And I think that's why people hold on to those traditions. Though they are not wonderful and they are not right, people hold on to them because they're predictable and they're known. There were chapels and churches in Cape Coast in the slave castle. They were right there legitimizing all of the trauma that happened and the assault and the murder and the terrorism. They were all there. And unfortunately in Ghana, there's a still huge big statue of a white Jesus that was used as the threat for compliance. So it's still the individual's opportunity and responsibility to grow through that and beyond it. And I can't say there's one body of knowledge to do that, but I think that that's a continuous journey.
We're going to put the telephone number up for those that want to get involved in the conversation. And I must make this note that rarely do we have calls before we put the number up. But as soon as we talk about religion, and because there's so many religious programs on this station, people are just waiting, champing at the bit to hear it, and they're ready to hit the phone. So with that being said, caller, I appreciate you watching and participating. What is your question or comment?
Hey, greetings. Well, with being a viewer of local access TV for a couple of decades, you kind of memorize the telephone number.
You're right.
Put up on the line. But what I wanted to say was, in among African Americans, when we talk about consciousness and we try to demonstrate our consciousness, we have this thing in the black community, we're going to show who knows more than the other. Mm-hmm. We bring up the issue of religion. And what we try to do, what I've noticed, is we try to show a contradiction among African American people in being a Christian and the white people. But we fail to look at the constant that has been in our face. African American people's Christian religion was never like the white people's Christian religion. Mm-hmm. Okay? The African American denominations have been the safe haven for organization and resistance against enslavement and all the other residual effects that came after enslavement. Now, that statement is either true or false. Now, if that statement is true, then we should be analyzing how did black people use a theological concept that whites may have introduced to them to resist enslavement. You know, when white people did not want black people to organize their own churches, they wanted black people in their churches to keep an eye on them. But black people constantly among themselves sought to organize congregations within the white congregations, and many times during slavery had their own congregations. The Denmark VC and all of that was in the church. So the idea that African Americans practicing Christianity is some kind of contradiction or flaw in us is really not looking at the historical evidence of how African Americans have used their version of Christianity to resist slavery and all the other residual effects that came after slavery. And I think the conscious community has to come to grips with that. Every movement, whether it was a slave revolt in Haiti or whatever, involved some sort of spiritual concept. No atheism was involved here. And so we have to kind of look at the facts of the historical record. Yeah, white people, we knew white people were contradicting themselves when they said one thing about Christianity and how they treated us. We very much knew that. We were not stupid people. But we also knew how to code stuff and to conceal stuff to prevent from being figured out by the oppressor in our attempt to resist him. That's all I want to contribute and say there, that we have to be careful when we constantly get into this debate about the Nicene Council and what the Bible said, because it's irrelevant. Look at the historical fact of how we use religion to build a de facto nation within a nation. And I'll continue to listen. Thank you.
Thank you, my brother. Appreciate it. Go ahead. Did you want to respond?
I really think those are important points. Black people are not monolithic. You know, the whole idea is that just because racism is one of the things we experience, no matter what class, what language, we're not monolithic in our spiritual expression either. So that's important for us to realize. Secondly, is Albert Robital wrote a book called The Invisible Institution, where he talked about how religion was used to keep the peculiar institution alive, so the separation of the person from their spirit. But James Cone, in his recent work about the tree, talks about the ability of the African American, adaptive American of color, to use spirituality and faith for liberation purposes. And he too talked about the coded nature of our conversation. He's not the first to talk about the role that Jesus plays in black church and the role that Jesus plays in other churches. So the idea of us to create and own a way of understanding the Christ light and the Christ journey and the God expression in the world is certainly signatured by a people who have come through tremendous bondages to still find themselves operating as ingenious and excellence.
You know, I was going to get to this later, but you brought it up now, so we're going to get to it. The concept of Jesus, the understanding of I think he said the facts of historical records. We have found in the facts of historical records that the concept of Jesus initially came out of Kemet, which people call Egypt. We have also come to understand and learn that black people was on the earth longer than whites have been on the earth. In fact, whites can only stretch it as far as 6,000 years. Their white folks as scholars have documented that black people have been on the face of this earth for millions of years. They don't know how many, but they know it's millions of years. So if we take 1 million and we look at 6,000, there is a severe gap there. So how is it that black people are the original people of the earth? That would constitute the fact that black people had to be the original chosen people So how is it that we allow a European to masquerade as the chosen people, or the Jews, or the Hebrews that black people know they are? So why is that black churches continue to allow this myth to be perpetuated?
Well, historically, there's a conversation about when the landmass was won, and it is called Pangea by others, and says that when the tectonic plates shifted, that's where we got our continents. However, when the landmass was won, people, the original people, were in all parts of the landmass. And so when the landmass broke up, then those original people were still there. They're just located in other parts of the world. So the idea is the folks who were original people being around is not, we don't have to deny it, but what we do talk about is when the writing was introduced as the dominant way of communicating messages, what occurred was that other languages were discounted. That way, it makes it easy to separate. It makes it easy to separate the idea of where the power really is, where the truth really is. Because if you can discount a man's culture, a woman's language, then you discount their message. And that's one of the things that happened, is those symbols were ignored and discounted. And so the common communicator for the message was the alphabet as we understand it today. So whoever had the press and the pen told the story.
But now we have the press and the pen. My question actually is, why do our churches continue to perpetuate this myth?
I hope a caller that calls in has an answer for that.
Okay. We have a caller, by the way. Caller, we appreciate you watching and participating. We ask that you turn your television, the volume to your television all the way down. Talk to us directly in and through the telephone. Caller, what is your question or comment?
Yeah, I appreciate your show tonight, as I usually do. Bring your guests. I was listening to my radio in my car yesterday afternoon, and they had a rerun of the brilliant scholar from Dallas. He's one of the best I ever heard. And I heard you mention the secret societies. Could you give me the names of the secret societies and just exactly what they do? Thank you very much.
Okay, I appreciate that. Actually, it's going to be difficult to integrate that into tonight. I will give you, we're talking about the Freemasons, we're talking about the Boule, we're talking about the Greek organizations, fraternities and sororities. We're talking about even the Christian and Catholic Church. Because, and this will go back into what we were talking about just a few minutes ago, the Catholic Church has us believing that they are the ones that put together the belief system called Christianity. They call themselves the Universal Church, which was taken from the original church in Mesopotamia, which was constructed, created, and manned by all black people.
Well, the 42 laws of Ma'at and the Harambe Code is example of base informants for what we now see as the 10 Commandments and other guiding values and principles lifted up in this. But the same is true in Buddhism, the same is true in Islam, the same is true in so many other dominant mainline traditions, is that their source has been exploited and ignored, and that the ownership in an appropriated way they've claimed. It is still the responsibility of each of us to do a better job at resourcing.
So where's the responsibility for the black clergy?
Here's the thing I was about to say, is that in seminary, it depends on what your seminary's focus is as to what kind of information you get. People who are funded by a particular funding entity, then their writers all of that is who you learn from. I remember sitting in a class one year at St. Paul's School of Theology, and I was just finally saying, look, I'm not trying to hear nothing else about these dead white German men. I'm not upset about what they've done, but these are not the original voices, and it is not proven to work well, mostly for people of color in America. So stop trying to feed me something that is not appropriate and is like, makes me want to, in this instance, just kind of vomit because it's so terribly wrong in how things are done. I don't think that got me a lot of favor, but I had clarity. So I think it's the institutions that people learn from, it's the resources that they use. When I came to New Orleans, I really worked with churches to do faith-based community organizing. My job was to figure out who they're listening to, what they're reading, and in Christendom, who are the informants that they watch? Is Paul their informant? Because if I don't know who their informants are, it's hard to have the conversation. Because who I think about, who I use, it may not apply to what other people do. Particularly for us with regard to justice and why certain things should not continue to happen in our communities. And the people that could have the moral voice are silent or giving wrong information. So it's an important question to keep asking, but it's also based upon who their informants were and how we let go of informants that are not right, true, or perfect or appropriate anymore is a huge undertaking.
One of the things that few of us know, that all of us should know because of our extensive participation and relationship with the black church, and you have especially Baptist churches that call themselves missionary Baptists. Well, I have a question that I always pose to them, especially the minister. What was the first mission of the church? And the outreach mission. What was the first outreach mission of the Christian church? Very few of them will say something other than what the truth is. And when I mentioned to them the first mission of the original church was to go and civilize the Europeans who were in the mountains, who were barbarians, who were just, I don't know, they were just barbaric people. They were killing up each other. Blacks left from the church in Mesopotamia to begin to civilize them. So why is it no black folks are talking about how disruptive, how savage, how brutal white folks have been towards each other prior to them coming into our communities and becoming very brutal with us? Because when we look at the historical record, we find out that we acted far better than they act. But they have flipped the script on us now. They point to our actions as being very barbaric.
But isn't that what sin does? Isn't that what wrong does? Is it makes itself right. One of my favorite theologians is Howard Thurman. And Thurman wrote a book called Jesus and the Disinherited. And he talks about what happens when people's backs are up against the wall. And one of the hellhounds he talks about is fear. Fear comes when violence is uncontested. And so people become afraid. So much violence has been poured out upon people of color and indigenous folks that folks are compliant to a message that is the wrong message. It's an unhealthy message, it's an unholy message, and it just ignores the responsibility of the messenger, which is why your show becomes important, because then it's not just the hunter telling the story, it's the lion telling the story. So imagine a hunter has the gun pointed at the lion's head. But if the lion said the hunter was in my field threatening my family and I had to do whatever I needed to do to protect me and mine, then the story would be different. So we're in a position where we have to tell the story differently ourselves, and this creates opportunity for that to occur.
I lived in a place called Simliki, which is in Uganda.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the first things I learned was Simliki was lion country.
Mm-hmm.
And you would hear, you would smell lions all day long.
Mm-hmm.
You could see them clearly from a distance,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not talking about a great distance, but a distance that was protected and established boundaries had been established. I learned very quickly that we had nothing to fear from the lions during the day.
Because the boundary was clear.
But if you get caught out past sundown, you were fair game. So the respect that the people showed the lions and the respect that the lions showed the people was something that I had never really experienced before.
Because the lion's portrayed as a brutal animal.
Exactly.
But if you watch the life of a lion, it's so big that it has to use most of its energy just to move around. And so it only has a surge when it needs to have food. And if you then disrupt their activity, then of course you get the assault that comes.
Or they feel threatened.
Yeah, they feel threatened. You get the assault that comes. I just want to go back to something.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. King had a line that says, man's inhumanity to man. And we're talking about this brutality here that goes unchecked and it's not broadcasted on the news. So there were some people that got shot and killed one another, and they were not of color, so you never saw their picture. But as soon as one little thing happens, a person of color, it seems, the picture's plastered everywhere. This is the propaganda to breed fear so that people could legitimize doing the wrong things that are being done that are not reported on them. So again, whenever we can tell the story, we should tell the right story. It becomes ours, and it becomes ours to look beyond the veil, so we just don't accept wholeheartedly, blanketly, what's being produced without resort. That means on the television, also means in the pulpit, or wherever these mass gatherings are occurring.
Are you familiar, have you done any reading of Walter Williams and his historical origins of Christianity?
I've done some, and I would like to say that I don't have enough reference lines in there to quote any of him.
Well,
yes.
Are you familiar with Serapis?
S-E-P-R-A-S. S-E-R-P-R-A-S.
P-A-I, yeah.
Yeah.
S-A-R-A-P-I-S, I'm sorry.
A-P-I-S, yeah.
Serapis. Serapis, as he tells it, and he gives you plenty of references to find this. Serapis was the Greek god that became the Jesus, the Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes into great length in explaining the cult of Serapis, what it did and how it came about, because we understand the Greeks and the Romans got everything in the way of cultural enrichment, education, religion from Kemet.
Mm-hmm.
And they took what they could understand from Kemet, and they went back and reconstituted, repackaged it, and came out with it.
Yeah, the gods, the originals.
Yes.
All the...
So my question is, if we have scholars who makes this information available, why do we not have black clergy sharing this information with their followers?
Again, every person's accountable for their own word and their own action. I can say a couple of things. One is that people only teach what they know and what they're comfortable with and what gives them benefit.
Which give them benefits.
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead.
I think the other thing that's at stake is once you start naming dates and numbers and facts, there's always this other activity where they're going to up one or prove different or better. So it becomes a contest of wills and what numbers you can come up with. I think what's possible is that sometimes people are also telling a message in a coded way, and people have forgotten the language of the code.
Well, you mentioned code, so the caller, he asked me about, excuse me, secret societies. Excuse me, but I guess we'll get into some of it anyway. Codes, symbolisms, comes from the church, right? There was a group that the Catholic Church used in the early days, and we're talking 1000 up to about 1314 BC, I mean AD. And they were a secret society.
Some of the Knights of Templar?
Yes, they were a secret society. In fact, they were actually Freemasons. The Pope tried to eliminate all of them after they went out on missions that he had requested that they do, and when they came back, he tried to wipe them out. That's when the Catholic Church left what we know as Freemasonry and created their own, which now is Columbus, something of Columbus, and Saint Peter Claver, Knights of Columbus and the Knights of Peter Claver. Now, we don't look and understand the fact that Freemasons are in all of the Christian churches. In fact, most of the ministers, I say all, but most of the ministers are Masons themselves.
Right, but remember, whatever you can't control, you demonize. And so I have some very loving people who are also clergy who are adamant about the presence of Freemasonry. I would just like for them to be just as adamant about other sects that are just disruptive and destroying. If you're going to be that adamant about people who build your buildings, who help you have the cornerstone of the church you occupy, I just need you to be just that adamant about censoring and silencing and breaking up other groups that are in place that harm.
Well, we understand that the Masons built these churches because they needed a place that they could safely hide in clear sight. And that's how the church and the Masonic organization possibly came together. But personally, from looking at the history, it was the Freemasons that created the religion that we have and know today. So we actually, and I refer to members of the church, the Christian church, as being associate Masons, that they have no idea that they're a part of the institution, but they are still carrying the mantle of the institution, and they protect that institution. So when we look at the fact that we have a lot of relationships that are either undercover or hidden and out of sight, and we offer them to a select few, which corroborates my thesis on the fact that the church, Catholic Church since they were the beginning, is the ones that created classism.
There are a couple of things. One is I wanted to just talk about Bell Hooks wrote a book called Rock My Soul, and it's Black People and Self-Esteem. Bell Hooks reminds us that the Black church is the hospital and the mental health institution for community. So it operates by a set of understandings. One is that our existence in the world, in America in particular, is complex, and we need to have an environment that is open to the complexities of how we live and move in our communities. And that means that a number of organizations, or what we call silent communities, are not going to be overtly discussed, but they're a part of the essentiality of what it means to be safe and present in America. So that was one of the ways that the Black church is uniquely different and was uniquely different at that time. Whether it still holds that is another matter. But that was one of the reasons why the Black church was so significant. You could have your freedom meetings and sing Jesus Will Make a Way. You could have your church services and you could tell people steal away and when you need to steal away. You could have your, all in the frame of what it means to be church, to have this freedom and liberation experience in America in particular. So when we start talking about all the nuanced small groups that make up our church, these groups such as the Masons serve as pillars to how church operates. I don't know if it's all right or not. I just know that when you've had a hard day and you can go somewhere where people can sing a song that soothes you, which is what the blues also do, and that you can run around the building and let it all out without being put in a straitjacket. Something about that's kind of good, because you have to have somewhere to emote, somewhere safe, until you get yourself back together again.
I know the caller talked about hearing a rerun on BOK that I did several weeks ago, and it was the person out of Dallas was Azar Kwesi. Mm-hmm. Now Kwesi does a number of videos and has a lot of writings on the Masons, the mm-hmm. Masonic order, and the fact that Masonry was originally and initially Black folks' thing. Whites took it off of us, okay? But we have the fastest hour in television. And I mentioned that because I wanted to let him know and others know that I do extensive writings about the Masons, the secret societies, the church, in my book, The Original Holocaust, which is available at Community Bookstore, 2523 Bayou Road, Wayne's World and Sons, 2255 St. Claude Avenue, and on the West Bank, Educators Delight, 3501 Holiday Drive, Suite 405. So if you have curiosity about some of these things, then pick up the copy of Our Story, The Original Holocaust, and it will go into depths about why it is we're in the position and condition that we're in today. Denise, I want to thank you for coming in, and I want to welcome you back that we can continue this discussion or continue a discussion about the work you're doing in the community, because you are very active there. We see you quite often out there on the front lines. I want to thank our viewers, and there's a number up there. If you want to get in touch with us, don't hesitate, give us a call. We appreciate it. We want you to remember that the information that's disseminated is not just for a select few, but it's for all of us. We all need to know this. And if you have the willingness, call me up. We'll put together classes if we need to, discussion groups, so that we can disseminate the information broadly to you. Thank you for being with us. Remember, stay strong, black folks. Stay involved, but most importantly, we have to stay committed to blackness. Till we meet again, Uhuru Sasa Mgawa.
Listen to me now, yo, before Dr. Dre, there was Dr. James, welding cords around a copper frame. We sing songs, not for the accolades, to lift voices like a helicopter blade. High in the listening skies, my eyes glisten and tears drop down like rain. Not from the pain, from the joy of how far we came. My brainstorms are designed to celebrate our reign. The collective, monuments erected, continents affected, presidents elected, ancestors making moves with the music we've been blessed with. We use it to keep communities connected. Through harmonies, a harmony is collected. Reaping the fruits our foremothers invested. Lift every voice till freedom has manifested. Come on, yeah, lift every voice till freedom has manifested. Come on, listen, lift every voice till freedom has manifested. Come on.
Sing a song,
yeah,
full of the faith that the dark past has taught us.
Come on.
Sing a song, full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun,
Facing the rising sun. Come on.
of our new day begun.
It's a new day.
Let us march on
Yeah.
till victory is
Yeah,
won.
until victory is won. Come on.
Till victory is
This is
won.
victory music. Come on, I hope you feel it.
Yeah.